Good evening, everybody.
Hello, and welcome back to the 10th installment of the Schnellenberger Family Foundation and Recovery Boot Camp's sponsoring of the free family weekly educational webinar for families affected by addiction and alcoholism. And as always, we're going to give a shout out to Coach Howard Schnellenberger and his lovely wife Beverly, who are the brain trust behind the Schnellenberger Family Foundation, whose idea to bring this to you is only possible because of their thoughts, as well as their son Tim, who is the CEO of RBC's ability to put it all together. And of course, right on the heels, in terms of gratitude for those three amazing people, is our gratitude for you, all of you who support and attend and participate in this, sharing the message of healing and overcoming this addiction and the problems that it brings by bounding together and developing a community of like-minded individuals who can win against this chronic problem, because we cannot win in single-handed combat, and only by joining together can we do that. And as always, to my immediate left is David Zaif, the COO of Recovery Boot Camp. And he is with us tonight, and he is typing stuff, which is why he's not looking at you.
Yeah, sorry guys, I'm listening though. And
he's
I'm glad to be here.
Very good listener. And I, as whether you may or may not know, am Rabbi Mark Rotenberg, and I am the Minister to Community here and Group Facilitator at Recovery Boot Camp. And as always, we welcome you. Now, tonight we're going to jump right into the things because we got some interesting stuff. So initially, we're going to start off with specifics on when to set boundaries and things of that nature. And then we're going to get into a certain set of slides. I think there's actually 5 of them, which I'm going to encourage you to take notes. We are going to outline the way to write, institute, and develop actual boundaries specific to your issues. We're going to show you how to engage in compassionate communication, how to have your point and your perspective heard, how to say it with a assertiveness that is effective, and how to institute those things. And that's really what we've been building up to up until this point. So we're really getting into like some real brass tacks kind of stuff. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. And as always, as Dave would say, we really, really, really relish the fact of you sharing. When you bring this out and you start to participate, it makes, not only does our job easier and we have less things to talk about, but you actually are proactive in gearing the conversation and directing it towards your ends, because your ends is really what needs to be done. Because me and Dave can sit here and talk, but you guys are in the trenches fighting this fight. We are too, but on a different level. You're the pre-fighters and we're the post-fighters, in essence, talking about the pivot, which I don't think we're going to get to today because we have a lot about development of boundaries while the person is active and pre-treatment. And then as we go on in the next few weeks, we're going to talk about those are going to morph and alter, how they become malleable and change once the person has the pivot, when they seek treatment, and finally when they enter treatment, and then down the line in long-term protracted recovery. How do we address them? Is there anything you want to say, Dave?
That was a pretty solid intro, and I appreciate you stepping up while I was typing away. I guess if you're new, we want to welcome you guys. If you're not new, welcome back. And just keep in mind as we go through the webinar tonight, just to echo a couple of things Mark said, when discussing boundaries, the best way that we can help explain them and give you instruction is to hear your own boundary techniques and your failures as well as your successes.
And your questions too.
Questions, issues that you've had when trying to set boundaries. I mean, we do this for you. We are a resource. Use us. It's one level to sit and listen. You can take your recovery to the entire next level by asking us our opinion, which we don't give unless asked, or well, unless we can't help ourselves. Answer your questions, relate our own stories to yours. I mean, this is all about that connection. And with boundaries, which for some of you out there who have tried, and are still trying and are succeeding, you know that it's difficult and it takes a lot of resilience and a lot of dedication and a lot of repetition, and we're going to go over that in detail. So if you have things that have worked for you, I guarantee you there's people out there desperate to hear some techniques that have worked. So I'll just echo Mark, please share with us.
Yep.
All you have to do is type the word share into your question box, or unless you want to type out your whole question, that's fine too. But don't type it and then stop looking at the box, because I will most likely ask if you will share live. And then the way it works is I'll unmute you and you'll be able to say your piece. And then I always feel rude muting you after you're done asking your question,
Right.
But I have to, just so there's no like
feedback loop.
Feedback and mic screechy things. Okay, so that's covered. I think we're light on polls tonight, but we have polls. So whether you're on your phone, tablet, computer, whatever other device you have, there will be poll questions that pop up periodically throughout tonight's webinar. They are interactive, which means it is up to you to answer them. They're all yes or no questions, so it should be pretty quick. The quicker you guys answer, the quicker we can discuss the answers and move on. So just when you see a poll pop up, answer yes or no as quickly as you can, and we will look at the results once everyone has voted. They are anonymous, so your vote won't go with your name or anything like that. It's just to help us get a better idea of how to steer the discussion from that point forward. So keep that in mind, and also keep an eye out on your chat box. It may be marked with like a little comic book chat bubble. And I'll just be putting some information in there about the Schnellenberger Family Foundation, ways to donate. We actually just had somebody donate a good amount of money to the Schnellenberger Family Foundation to upgrade all of the chairs that we use out in the courtyard for our meetings.
Thank you, by the way.
Yeah, so that was really nice.
Should we mention the name?
I don't know. I don't even know who it was. Cheryl. Okay. You know, but every little bit helps, and to just get something like that is really, it makes a huge difference, not just to us, but the clients here and everybody we're able to help. So I'll put a link if you guys want to contribute. Like I said, every dollar helps. Also some resources that you may need if you're thinking about sending someone down here for treatment, if you're trying to get someone into treatment up where you're at. Just a couple resources, couple people that work here that specifically deal with the admissions process, which can be not a nightmare, but there can be a lot of steps involved and it can be stressful. So anything you can do to alleviate some of that stress, we are here to try and help you provide that for you. So I'll be putting some stuff in the chat box throughout. I think that's it. So I think without further ado,
let's move on. I do want to say a couple things. First of all, Marjorie, if you're out there, and hopefully I'm sure you are, I didn't get a chance to read your text. I was actually in group when you texted me. I just saw it popped up and then I totally forgot about it. So I will respond to it afterwards. Or if you want to talk about it and something you want to share, feel free to do that while we're in the webinar. And Cheryl, thank you so much for that. That was awesome. One more thing I would also like to mention is that we have our friend Bibi Stein, who has a scholarship foundation that she set up in memory of her son. So there's also I guess a clicky place or whatever to
I think it's called a link.
Yeah, that's thing, a clicky linky thing place. I had a little bit of a brain issue right there. I have CRS. I've self-diagnosed myself, much like my alcoholism. And so hit that link if you want to. All the proceeds go to setting up scholarships for people to come here to Recovery Boot Camp who cannot afford treatment and are worthy of it and really want it and need to have it. And that's what it's all about. The one thing I did want to dovetail that Dave said when we talked about taking your recovery to the next level beyond love it. It sounds like the Odd Couple music.
Just keep going. I think.
So the what I was going to say to back up Dave is when you take it to the next level by participating, by speaking, it literally, we know neurologically, creates a proactive reality for recovery. You know, we always have this thing in AA or NA, we say, if you want to change your thought, you got to move a muscle. You move a muscle, you change your thought, right? So going out of your comfort zone and pushing something breaks that existential fear of not knowing, right? We don't know what it's going to be like, and we have projections about that, and that keeps us stagnant and keeps us down. If we're willing to push past that little invisible skein of fear, then what happens is we have huge amounts of relief, fulfillment, and it comes to us in terms of understanding that someone else is going to share and say, I had that question, I had the same fear, I'm so glad you asked it. But you can't rely on somebody else doing it. If you really want to take it to the next level, push past your zone and handle it, and that's awesome. So we're gonna move into the first slide. Remember, we got some things about when to set boundaries. There's a few questions. I think we're on slide 61, and we're gonna look at that, and then we're gonna move into those 71 through 76, and those are the slide numbers. You can get prepped for those in advance. Those are gonna be about how to write and institute boundaries specifically. Now, I don't know if those are downloadable, the writing ones, like those.
I think we have a handout, so
I believe there is
I'll
one
try and
too.
make it available. Maybe I'll post it in the empowerment group.
Yep, awesome.
So if you guys are not part of the Schnellenberger Family Foundation Empowerment
Good
Group,
pitch. Good
I'll
pitch.
put the Facebook name for the group in there in the chat box so you guys can join.
Yeah, and I have to preemptively apologize. I was not super active on the Facebook group this week, my bad, and really have no excuse, just was doing other things and totally lost track of it. So I will definitely make it right for you guys next week and try to post every day and have some feedback for your questions. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. So really what we're talking about is when to set boundaries, right? Remember, we went, maybe we should just do a quick review of the last 2 pages. What do you think? Let's do this. So let me back it up a little bit. Let me just click on this and let's go back. Oops, going the wrong way.
You want to go?
Yeah, let's go here to practicing. There you go. All right, so remember that when we started about this idea of how do I practice a boundary, how do I do it, we talked about all the problems that could reach up and how do I draw lines, and we came to this idea of like sticking to your guns. Remember, we talked about this practice make perfect, but it doesn't. It just makes progress, right? Mm-hmm. And in order for the boundary setting to work and to work for you, you literally have to develop the commitment to uphold this boundary, right? It has to be true, it has to be right, it has to be correct for you, and you must consistently uphold it. Like when it starts to waver, that's a problem. So the review, what we're talking about is sticking to your guns. This is the way I'm going to set it up. Like we will get into exactly the wording and the way to set it up, but the overarching idea is that I cannot be wishy-washy or flip-floppy when it comes to this, because these are really important. And that practice makes progress. It's an uncomfortable, unfamiliar type of process. So I'm going to be a little resistant, a little fearful. I'm going to feel awkward and unnatural the first time I do it. But as anything, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly the first few times. Like every time you try something the first couple times, you're not going to be amazingly stellar at it. It's like anything, skiing, surfing, playing tennis, like just doesn't matter, right? The more we practice, the better we get. And we have the capacity to do it. And understand the goal is for these boundaries to become merely muscle memory, especially if you've been struggling with an active addict for a substantial amount of time. You want to not have to ponder them and keep considering them. You want to just reiterate them quickly over and over. And we have to continue to do that because they're used to getting their own way. When we are in conflict with an addict or alcoholic, they are completely used to manipulating and getting their own way with you. If you keep this up and you continue to practice, you get more skillful, more successful, you have more grace and sophistication behind it, and it tends to be more effective. We also need to establish these boundaries to make us as family members safe, right? They learn where they stand with you. If you are solid and strength-bound and unmobile in these settings, what will happen is you really have a clearly defined line in the sand. There is no speculation about how far they can push. And the more you assess them and reiterate these boundaries, the less they're going to try to push back, because they're going to know exactly where you stand. And that's how we take care of ourselves, by having a clearly delineated and defined place where we're willing to go or allow somebody to go. Because beyond that, it's all about protecting ourselves. And remember, we asked that question last week. Are boundaries selfish? And in reality, they're not. They're inherently selfless. Because the truth is when I don't have a solid boundary, it ends up in a circumstance where I end up giving more to the person than I'm willing to give. It's kind of conflicted, right? Like they're going to push in and try to take from me, and my boundary is going to vacillate forward and backwards, which means they're going to end up taking more than I'm willing to give. And this is inherently a problem because I have other people in my life, spouses, other family members, other children, relatives, people at work, the entire spectrum of the people engaged in my life. When I allow the identified patient or the addict and alcoholic to take advantage of me and take more than I'm willing to give, it actually steals from the other people in my life and steals their ability to have what they need from me. So by instituting a boundary, I am inherently become very generous, right? If I don't set those boundaries, I give away more of myself than I'm willing, right? Which means I can't afford to be generous with other people over a long period of time. So now let's go ahead and jump into the practicing of these boundaries. And this is where we were going to review that boundaries allow other people to grow, right? That by setting this boundary, I do not water them. They, in essence, now have to water themselves. So they're going to either grow in the right direction or in a different direction. However, I am no longer the arbiter of that because I cannot control it. Remember, we always try to remember the 3 C's of Al-Anon. I did not cause it, I cannot control it, and I cannot cure it. What I can do is alter my reaction to it. Remember, way back in the day, probably the 2nd or 3rd week, we read from page 30 in the Al-Anon book, which I'm going to make a shout out to right here. I'm going to mention that anyone and everyone should buy the Al-Anon Big Book. It is called How Al-Anon Works for Friends and Families of Alcoholics. And on page 30 in that book, there's a little blurb, there's a page that talks about being aware of the choices we make. And it's done through analogy. It says, if we're holding the end of a rope and the alcoholic or addict picks up the other end and starts to tug, most of us would automatically react and tug automatically. What we don't know, because it becomes almost autonomic, is that it's actually a choice we're making to pull back. If we start to be aware of the choices we are making, we can then make different choices. We can establish and institute boundaries. For instance, if somebody picks up the rope that I'm holding and starts to pull, all I have to do is let go, because there is inherently no tug of war unless both parties are in conflict or both sides are being tugged at. And when I become aware of what is happening now, the choices I'm already making, it allows me to make better ones. And that's what the development of boundaries are. So they allow other people to grow. They make others conscious of their own behavior, thus allowing them to make their own choices about where they want to go with it. Boundaries allow you to get more of what you want and less of what you don't want, right? They not only protect you from unwanted behaviors, but they also tend to foster and subtly cajole people into the behavior you want, because you can't really force that behavior, but by having good boundaries, you limit other behavior, which leaves them very few options. And that's the whole point, right? I'm not controlling it. I'm trying to make the circuit. Listen, I believe absolutely that every one of you has the right to manipulate your addict as much as they've manipulated you. And the truth is that you have the right to coercion and manipulation and these things, and because these are to protect you, and that's what setting of boundaries are. We also remembered that effective people set boundaries. When I do what we have to do, we get what needs to be done, because doing so keeps me in control of the time and effort that I invested. It makes me feel better about myself. And that protects me and my mental health from just osmotic damage of the addict around me.
I also think that it's like a lot of fear that will prevent people from setting boundaries. And so to be able to institute them and stick to them is in a way a real confidence booster, and it can do a lot for your self-esteem, because you were challenged and afraid to set the boundary, and you have the fearlessness to do it anyway, which builds character.
Right. And self-esteem is not something that's a theoretical construct. We gain esteem by doing esteemable acts, and setting a boundary for someone which now prevents you from actually hindering or contributing to their own destruction is by definition something esteemable, which gives you a sense of feeling of accomplishment. Even if they do not act the way you want, or the final outcome of your fantasy does not manifest through them, what you have done for yourself is esteemable in that you are no longer contributing to their demise. So now let's get to the new stuff. So the question then becomes, well, after we've reviewed all this and we think about these things, now when should we in fact set these boundaries and how do we do it? Well, what we have to do is look at first things first, right? So let's ask the poll question right out of the gate, right? Does the beginning of boundary setting require interaction with the addict, or is it just one-on-one? Did we review this? I think we did this last week, didn't we?
We did.
We did. Oh, so let's just go ahead and go through it.
Let's skip the polls.
Let's skip the polls. So we make a hard boundary. Yes, this is exactly when. We make that hard list. We do it separate from the people initially. We don't do it with the addict present. And remember, we talked about getting the rest of your family together to be on the same team, right? We ask those family members and others who are part of the boundary development team, as it were, to make their own hard boundaries and bring them to the table so we can institute them in a unified front. We then get together and we go over those boundary lists and then we combine them into sort of a master plan where everybody's on the same team so we cannot be triangulated. Remember, that was a big thing. This helps establish the unified front and it prevents the splitting that occurs, right? He doesn't run to mom and go, hey, mom, dad said I could do this if you do. Hey, dad, mom said I could if you did, right? So because, and you also have to remember that sometimes there's people that are not going to want to participate, right? They're like, oh, I can't this, that, or whatever. They're not going to create those lists, right? That's why it's important that you definitely show a unified front and stick to yours. All right. So the next idea is now it's time to set these boundaries and present them to the addict, right? So we do it in a calm period of time. Remember, use the example. I can't remember who shared about inviting her son over for dinner.
Well, he wanted money for food.
Correct.
She said, no, when you come to my house, we'll cook food together.
Correct. And that took like that onus of an adversarial relationship off the table, and it was calm. So in the same type of environment like that. So, figure out a way to manipulate the circumstance to bring the temperature down, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't present those things during an argument or even a place of tension, because their response is going to be to be defiant, right? And you should initiate the conversation. You shouldn't allow them to, because then they're in control. And this is you putting your foot forward, right? This will produce the foundation, or as Dave invented the word, the boundation, the foundation of your boundaries, which are the things that are really going to help you. Ooh, this almost felt like it was going to fall right there. Which are almost going to help you to really establish this as a precedent and a continuum. And remember that the addict's reaction to your hard boundaries will cause you to create more boundaries. They're going to be frustrated. They're going to have anxiety. So what's going to happen is, what's going to be revealed is the need for new boundaries while you start to do them. So now let's talk about assertion. And I think this is where, how did I get so far behind? That's so crazy.
It's all right.
All right.
Do I need to set a boundary with you?
You may need to.
Okay.
All right. So let's look at slide 64. Asserting boundaries, and we'll move into the next one. So the next one is this. Let me ask the question right out of the bat, right? So are boundaries inherently a reaction, right? Are they a reaction to what the person does? Do we have any questions yet? Has anybody wanted to share or brought anything up?
No, but one person.
Because I've literally been talking 100 miles an
hour. One person asked for the link to send to other people to register for the webinar. Oh, so nice. If any of you guys would like that, if you have friends who could benefit from this, let me know and I'll get you a link to send to them so they can register and tune in.
Is that link on the website for both RBC and the Schnellberger Family Foundation?
It's a lot of places, but sometimes it's easier if I just send it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's on my phone. I sent to forward it to people. All right, cool.
Pretty interesting.
Interesting. So pretty much almost an evenly split, because let's be frank, I am kind of splitting hairs with this, and we're talking about, we're really talking semantics. But the truth is that boundaries they may be a theoretical reaction to that person's behavior, but they should not, in fact, be reactive. In fact, boundaries, there we go. In fact, boundaries should be proactive as opposed to reactive, which means even though they are, see, and what I mean by not reactive is, and proactive is that they now become a response as opposed to a reaction. See, I don't react to the negative behavior of my active addict. I respond to it in a proactive manner, which means I create for myself, right? And even though they are inherently a response to the disease and the results of the disease, it is important that we need to make them preemptive. I don't do them immediately after a violation. I do them after a series of violations or a series of discomforting or uncomfortable circumstances that I no longer feel okay with, and I preemptively prevent those things from occurring again, right? So they are inherently preemptive, right? They are a response to the overall condition, but not individual behaviors. And this is hugely important because they need to be general enough that you don't get into like a nitpicking fight with the addict, right? They're going, oh, you're just doing this because I took the car or did this or did that. No, this is basically, they need to be stated in a way that it's not an individual reaction to a single event. It is a reaction to the overall condition, not the behaviors that you do, but it's a reaction to the disease. It is a response to this disease, which I am no longer going to contribute to, right? They need to be safety nets for you. For us as family members, we have to create these regardless of how bad the addict's behavior gets. So that their behavior is going to deteriorate. Remember, we talked about this. This is how family members inherently get sick. Our tolerance, so the addict's tolerance for the drugs increase, and our tolerance for their behavior automatically increases because the shock value tends to lessen every time the same behaviors are done. So what I do by creating this safety net is, regardless of how bad their behavior gets, when I set up the boundary, I now stop myself from getting worse solely by exposure. That's the key, right? When I have the boundary, that means they violate the boundary. There's no longer about being shocked and then losing and then like getting tolerant to that. It's now become, this is a violation of my boundary. It's not going to occur. You can't come to the house and do this. That's it. There's not even a discussion anymore about it. There's not me softening and going, oh, you know, the first time they stole from my purse, that was terrible. And then I like locked the purse in my room and then it got stolen from there and then I had to put it in the safe. And like, the first time I was shocked that someone would steal, and then you're like, so you even get to the point where like, I'm going to leave $20 out somewhere where I know they're going to steal it from instead of the $200 I have locked away somewhere else, right? That is you actually condoning the theft. So when you have that boundary, this is not happening. You are not taking from me. And if you do, you can't be in the house because I don't trust you. Then that no longer becomes an issue, and you no longer start to diminish your own moral standard behind those behaviors. All right, so let's move on to the next one.
Got someone who I just want to have share. Actually,
awesome.
Two.
Let's do them.
Let me get Deborah up first and let her go. I think, Deborah, you're going to have to unmute your mic on your end.
There it is.
Here we go.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi, guys. I've been faithfully attending for all 10 sessions, and it's been extremely helpful for me, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks
for being
here. I've been doing this horrible dance of death for about 15 years. As I mentioned before, my son is 34. He is currently in jail, but he's due to be released in about 5 days. He's only been in for about a month. I was hoping that he would get longer. I wrote a letter to the judge, the DA, and his attorney, pretty much begging them to sentence him to mandated inpatient long-term drug treatment, but they did not do that. So he's been abusing heroin and methamphetamine. And I had to get a restraining order about a year ago because of his behavior and my classic response. I've done everything wrong. I've completely enabled him and didn't know or understand what I was doing for years.
Mhm.
But anyway, I just wanted anyone else who's having to cut their addict off like I have to know that it is the hardest thing I've ever done. I have to talk myself into it every day, just like if I was addicted, I would have to constantly stay on top of, pep talking myself that this is the right decision, and it's my only choice because it's the only thing I haven't tried. And I was really messed up, and I can't live like that anymore. But I have to stay completely away from him because I am not. I think I have like PTSD from everything that did happen for all these years, and I'm not strong enough in his presence to maintain my boundary. If any of that, all of that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. Thank you so much for that share. Like it's really true because we feel that when we do have to like literally cut ourselves off from the toxicity of the people that we love, that it's really brutal, right? Like we feel as though it's a denial of the love that we should have for them in a classic kind of archetypal role, like a parent always protects and takes care and backs up their children. But eventually a line has to be drawn. Like, God forbid that the person was an unrepentant criminal or a murderer or things like this. Like we see that on the news, like how can that mother knowingly defend this person who has done these crimes? It's the same thing. You have to be able to assert that boundary because it's not a denial of love. It's actually an assertion for love of their life, not for the path of destruction. And it's beautiful that you say that. And you do absolutely have post-trauma from that thing. That's what happens is we become denured to the violence, to the behavior, to the extent where you have to pull a restraining order. And, understand that disconnection from an individual who's toxic is an action. It's a powerful action that I cannot be engaged with you until you become human again. And it's a real thing. And it's probably the hardest thing that any parent or even spouse will have to do. But it is something that actually has to happen because God forbid that they perish on your watch, in your enabling time. That would be something that is untenable. You would not be able to live with that mostly. And I've seen that numerous times. Like the destruction that occurs is far, far worse. Thank you so much.
We had a couple of people ask, since Deborah filed a restraining order against her son about a year ago, when I guess he would be 33, 34, people with younger addicts in the home, teenager, 20s, they're asking, is there a time when it's okay to, is there like a specific age when the restraining order becomes appropriate?
Or maybe Deborah would like to share again about if she would have known, like what she knows. Like hindsight bias is ridiculous. You never knew then what you know now. But if you did, do you think maybe Deborah will share whether she thought it would, if she knew, she would have done it when it was 20, 22, 24, 25, 18? Yeah. Listen, once they're an adult and really become in the position where their behavior becomes not just unbearable, but bordering on threatening and violent, you absolutely have not just the right, but it's almost an obligation to protect them. Because understand that addicts that are active addicts and alcoholics that have blackouts and fly into violent rages can literally commit acts of violence without knowing it, without it being a conscious act. And what could happen is they could literally inflict violence upon you, God forbid, the worst case scenario. But even without that, they could end up legitimately doing real time in a penitentiary for an assault that they perpetrated on you, a family member. And by instituting this boundary and getting TRO, which is a temporary restraining order, or a order of protection. They're named different things in different states. You actually have a way of intervening preemptively and maybe preventing them from actually ending up with a violent felony on their record, which is awesome.
So Deborah just typed that age doesn't really come into the equation if they're 18 or above. The only qualifier to a restraining order is if there's been a personal threat to your safety that's been made,
Yep.
then a restraining order is appropriate to at least seek.
Right.
And
And a lot of-
age doesn't really come into it.
And a lot of times you don't actually need a verbal threat. It's a threat of perception. If you feel unsafe in your house or your domicile in the place you work, there's an implied threat of violence. Many, many times that becomes the standard for granting a TRO. Just so you know. Thank you so much, Deborah. Was there another?
Yeah, I'm gonna get Alice on the line.
Is that AB,
It
our
is
friend?
AB.
Hi, AB. I had a text conversation with her. Hi, Alice.
Hello, how are you?
How are you?
Good. This is just the boundaries and everyone, the caller before talking about how difficult it is to institute these boundaries. I totally get that. And with all the education now that I've had and our son being 10 months sober now, it's awesome, but it just brings my heart in my throat again every time I think about that time when he was home, and it literally brings me right back to that point where it was the boundary that we finally pulled up our big boy pants and said, all right, you're either going to rehab or you're out of this home. And just like you said, Rabbi, it was, I'm not gonna, and it was literally your words to tell me, you're gonna facilitate his death in your home if you don't set this boundary and get him out. But, and it's just so maddening that it takes us that long. I wish there was just some way to educate everyone to institute boundaries earlier, so that maybe it cuts down on the duration of that phase or whatever. But I'm sure it's all relative, we don't realize, it's love, it's all that comes into play when you're dealing with your loved one and you do what you think is right. So hang in there, everyone. It does get better. There is hope. And thank you guys so much for everything you do.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Alice.
Alice.
And Alice said something important. She said, you do what you think is right, which is really the way you have to approach it. Because probably up until now, if you don't have a lot of education vis-a-vis this particular thing, you tend to do what you feel is right? And feelings can be deceptive because they are genetic memory, archetypal role assignment, things of that nature, which, we are almost inculcated from early childhood to do this way, right? And it's based on our feelings or our emotional drive, when really the intellect needs to come into play. You need to step back, you need to disconnect emotionally, you need to assess the circumstance. It's so funny because Alice was with us two previous, even more.
The first
one, the first iteration. So this is our
third, right?
third. This is our third. So the very first
It
time
was
we
like
ran,
a little over a year ago.
yeah, a little over a year ago, the very first time we ran through, Alice was participating and she kept calling us and saying, how do I get him a treat? And so she was gung ho. She learned this while her son was drinking, it was going on. She finally instituted the thing. And last night she's getting selfies of me and her son. We're like, taking selfies. 10 months later, there you go. Miracles happen all the time. So we got another question?
No, let's
move on.
Let's go with one more slide and then I'll have 5 more.
So the next slide is about naming the behavior, right? So we need to understand. Let's ask a question about this. Is telling the addict specifically the things that bother you, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Is like laying it out, like laying out the facts, like a litany, this, and this. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because you would think that it's highly confrontational and you're just poking them with a stick. It's so funny. But is it good or bad? It's interesting. I was thinking about something when Deborah was sharing, and then again when Alice was sharing, because we have this emotional investment, because of what we're supposed to do as parents. It's funny because I say this all the time when I work with people. It's like I hear them all, they're like, well, he keeps pressing my buttons. He keeps pressing my buttons, or she's pressing my buttons, or my parents are pressing my button, or I'm pressing her. And I always tell them the reason they know how to press them so well is because they installed them. when you live in close proximity in a family unit, you are the one that inherently installs those buttons in your family members around you and vice versa. So sometimes if you want not to have that conflict, you need to distance yourself at least temporarily from that circumstance, right? And really recovery is about learning to move those buttons to a different spot. Because you're going to have them. So, ooh, look at that. Yes. Is telling the addict specifically what bothers you a good thing? Yes, it is, absolutely. Even though there is the idea that it's going to lead to a direct confrontation or an argument about those specific things. Remember the last slide, we said it's not a reaction to specific behaviors. It's a reaction to the entire disease, the overall thing. However, to specifically create an active boundary for those things, where am I drawing the line? You have to be specific about the things. Naming the behavior can be as simple as saying, you are in my personal space, or I do not want you in the house, or you keep asking me to pay your phone bill, even when I continually tell you no, I will not. You keep asking me for the keys to the car, and I'm not going to let you drive because I know the probability that you're going to drive inebriated or high is very high. No. And I need you to stop asking. It can be as simple as that, but you have to specifically lay out the behavior because maybe the person doesn't actually realize what they're doing or they minimize the negativity. If you are actively invested in telling them, absolutely, and not aggressively, but assertively, that this is what it is, right? Without starting that fight, then you're going to be able to be clearly delineated. This is the line it does not cross, right? And maybe they don't even understand how bad it is, right? So you need to say that.
There's also a chance that they just won't care.
Yeah, that's a big chance. And a lot of times they don't, right? However, this is why we went on the review where it says practice makes progress. You know, trying again, stick to your guns, because they will not care. Probably it's a guarantee that they won't care.
Well, at least externally they'll present they don't care.
Correct. And initially they may not actually care because they will probably think that this is just yet another threat. I've heard it before.
Right, or an opportunity to wear you down.
Correct, or wear you down, whatever it is. You're not going to stick by your guns. So we've had this discussion before. You said you're not giving me money, and then you do, yada, yada, yada. However, that's this point. If you start to institute these things on a continuous basis, if you have continuity of that hard line, they will start to care because that option is now off the table for them, and that's what it is. And we have to understand that being non-confrontational gives that person the opportunity to apologize. Like if you just straight off in an assertive manner say, this is the behavior that I will not bear and I do not want it in my house, and they don't think or don't believe you at first, and you reinstitute it over and over again, maybe they get to the point where they're like, you know what, I'm sorry, I didn't know. And their reasons are probably not going to be altruistic. They're probably going to be because they want to get back or ingratiate themselves again to you. However, that doesn't even matter. Their motives are not important because all of a sudden you see that your boundary that you set up to protect yourself has as its byproduct affected their behavior in a positive manner. So it's coming true and doing what it's supposed to do regardless of their motivation for it. And that's what's the awesome thing, right? And maybe they do change and maybe they don't, but if you don't attach expectations to it, it doesn't matter, right? So naming it can also help you gain a lot more clarity about the situation that feels wrong, right? It's just off for some reason, right? Even if you can't point out why this is uncomfortable, you can just say that I do not want this circumstance. Maybe you aren't capable of finding the insight, like to say, I don't want to give you the car. Maybe you're unaware, maybe you go with that gut feeling. I don't want to give you my car. I don't want you to drive, right? You don't know that maybe you can't put the two and two together, that they're going to do a crime and then maybe it's going to get impounded and then you're never responsible. Like we see the immediate response, right? one of the things about recovery is this projection of long-term results, right? We move from plots to plans, right? It's good to have a plan. We don't hyper focus on the future, but we become practical about the results of our behavior. We choose our actions and words carefully, and we do that because we take that into consideration. But when you're emotionally invested in a conflict, sometimes you don't see it. But just by saying it, it'll help you gain more clarity in the long run of why. I don't want them to drive. I don't want them to hurt anybody. I don't want this. I don't want them to end up locked up. You may not see all that, A to B to C to D, but just saying, I don't feel comfortable with you driving and making that boundary may cause that revelation, right? Even if you can't point why, you use this tool to validate your intuition, which, by the way, you should start to redevelop once you institute boundaries. I had an email last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, we were talking about this, that someone was sharing that they had a feeling that this person was using again after they had some time. And I said, listen, you know what, follow that intuition, because when you start to work on yourself and engage in your own program, you start to redevelop your intuition. Your gut feelings start to become valid again, even though they may have been corrupted and diminished initially. So that's the thing. So
I mean, I don't know if Al-Anon's promises are the same as the Big Book's promises.
Intuitively, no. Yeah.
Yeah, but step 9, at least for an alcoholic, when you get to step 9 or about halfway through, there's something called the 9 step promises, and one of them is you'll intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle you.
Correct.
Right. So I think it might be true also of the family.
It is.
Like Mark was talking about, becoming addicted to the addict and their behavior and building up the tolerance to their drama. As you get sober yourself, at least in the respect of becoming a healthy family member who doesn't enable and goes to a 12-step fellowship like Al-Anon or Nar-Anon or Families Anonymous and gets a sponsor and works the steps, I think you have a way better chance of, one, experiencing what Mark is talking about, experiencing it quicker, and being able to make it stick more than just having it be a fleeting moment, right? But it would be something that was lasting.
Yep. And again, just to reiterate, go to a meeting, get a sponsor, do the steps. Go to a meeting, get a sponsor, go to steps. Go to a meeting, go to a meeting, go to a meeting, go to a meeting, get a sponsor, do the steps, get a sponsor, do the steps. Because these things are going to increase. We know absolutely unequivocally, the numbers do not lie. National Institute on Health, SAMHSA, which is the Association of Mental Health and Addictive Disorders, absolutely. When a family gets involved in their own recovery, they exponentially increase the probability of long-term recovery for the identified patient. It is absolute. There's not even a question about it. These numbers have been tracking for years, 20, 30, 40 years. We know this to be the truth. All right. So what we have to understand is, again, when we name it, we help gain a little bit more insight and clarity on the situation. The sophistication and subtleties of it can be revealed. And we, even if we don't know why we're uncomfortable, setting the boundary anyway will help your intuition come back and maybe reveal why, right? So understand this. Here's very important ideas. No, one word, one syllable, 2 letters is a complete sentence. Will you pay my bill? No. That's it. Can I use the car? No. Can I have money? No. Will you pay my rent? No. These are real. Also, there's another word. Stop. 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 We're not having this discussion. It is a complete sentence as well. And these are protective behaviors, and we need to do them to protect ourselves. Do we have another question, or are we moving on?
No, I have one that somebody wanted to, they can't unmute their mic.
Gotcha.
So this question is from Shelly, and she says, our son isn't presently working with a sponsor, and we are adamant that he take this step. How do we set a boundary around this subject without managing his recovery?
Okay, so her son has no sponsor.
Correct.
Okay.
And they're adamant about him acquiring one.
Well, yeah, as well they should be. Basically, you need to set up the boundary for you. And listen, you are inherently, in a certain way, fingers crossed, hopefully by extension, micromanaging his program. Again, We don't set boundaries to control the person, we do them to protect ourselves. Hopefully the byproduct is they exert a modicum of control on the outcome of the circumstance. So this is what you say. From what we know in our own programs and working with sponsors ourselves, that we do not feel comfortable having someone around and considering them to be active in their own recovery if they do not have a sponsor. Everything that we have learned for ourselves is that without sponsors, we make our own bad choices and our own recovery becomes self-determined. And when I am self-determined, I have the worst sponsor available, myself. And we are not willing to even discuss or engage in conversation about your program or how well or not you're doing until you have a sponsor. And, you know, literally you can say this, look, I'm not trying to control your program, but if you want to be around us, you know, you should probably be working a real program. And we would love to have a conversation with your sponsor because we have questions from them to help to ask for ourselves. Listen, you can't force them to have one or not have one, but you can say, listen, I'm not really comfortable with you hanging around if you don't have a sponsor, because that means that your brain, which is inherently sick, is trying to fix that sick with the brain that's sick. The sick brain can't fix the sick, right? Which means that the brain that made you sick in the first place can't fix it, which means that your decisions are still going to be broken. Because unless you have outside input, the brain that's sick is still making those choices. And I'm not willing to risk my safety and my environment behind your sick brain. That's what I would say. You know, I hope you get it, right? Because you are, in fact, making an effort to micromanage them, but you're really doing it. It's really about the perspective. I'm doing it for my own, right? So, Shelly, you would do it for your own program and your own solace and your own comfort. Yeah. So listen, I'm not willing to have you here until you have a sponsor, because the people that live in your head cannot be trusted. It's just that simple. They have bad ideas, and they always have. And how do I know this? Because look at where you are. Up until this point, you have trusted those people that live in your head, and they have got you here.
Right. So, and also for those of you out there who are unfamiliar with what a sponsor is.
Ooh, good idea.
So a sponsor is just, at least in AA or NA, you know, with the alcoholic and the addict, and it's mirrored quite almost exactly in Al-Anon. A sponsor is somebody who has worked all 12. This is what qualifies someone to be a sponsor, because there's sometimes I meet a lot of guys who have no idea. They think it's like the amount of time they've had sober or the kind of car they drive.
Life coach.
Right. Yeah. So the only thing, at least according to the literature, according to our textbook, Alcoholics Anonymous, that qualifies someone to be a sponsor is really the wording of step 12, which if asked in a question is, have you had a spiritual experience as the only result of working the 12 steps? And a spiritual experience, which we could also break down, but not to get into too much detail,
I would love to,
is a psychic change. It's a profound change in perception, a profound alteration in the way we react to things that come our way, right? As an alcoholic or an addict, the way I react to something is I get drunk or high. So if I can start having life come at me and my reaction changes, that is in essence the definition of a spiritual experience. So what qualifies someone to be a sponsor is, have you gotten to step 12 and have you had this psychic change they're talking about? If the answer is yes, that means you can be a sponsor. And it's a little controversial, but I don't care. If that happens for you at 90 days, 60 days, it becomes your spiritual obligation to go out and start helping other alcoholics. There's this like made up thing in AA that you need to have at least 1 year sober to sponsor somebody. It's because they're trying to turn a sponsor into a life coach, right? And I say to my clients and guys in my group, and I tell them to say the same thing to me. Like, no offense, dudes, but you're the last group of people that I would seek advice from on anything other than, you know, recovery talk and sobriety talk. I'm not going to you guys to get financial advice or legal advice. You know, I'm not, nor should you come to
marriage
me.
Advice.
Nor would I want to be that person for you. So it's not a sponsor's job to take you under their wing and be a mentor, contrary to popular belief. The role of a sponsor is to take you through the 12 steps as they're laid out in the literature, right? That's it. It's not their job to teach you how to invest your money or where to work. So getting back to the question, Shelly, maybe it needs to be explained what a sponsor is. I don't know if he knows or not, but there's, for those of you out there, some of you may think, and hopefully I'm wrong, but if I'm right, that's okay, that going to, like, entering into sobriety and entering into recovery means that my son, my daughter, my spouse is going to be going to a lot of AA meetings, day at a time, one meeting a day for the rest of his life. And we think that's recovery. That is not recovery. Okay, it's one part of recovery, which is called fellowship, but there's this whole other part, which is the program of action, which is the 12 steps, an instruction manual for permanent sobriety, if I may.
You may, because it is.
So if your son is not getting a sponsor, that probably means he's just going to meetings,
Right.
And that is like being sick with the flu, going to the doctor's office, sitting in the waiting room for an hour a day, talking to the other sick people in the waiting room about how sick you are, and then leaving without seeing the doctor and expecting the flu to go away. It's bananas, right? But yet we have so many alcoholics and addicts who just come to AA, treat it like a spiritual waiting room. They sit in there for an hour a day, talk to the other sick people in the room about how sick they are, and then just leave and expect their sickness to go away. It doesn't work like that. Now, if I am sick with the flu, I do have to sit in the waiting room, but the ultimate goal is to get to a doctor, somebody who is armed with the facts about what I suffer from, who has the knowledge to pass on to me to lay out a prescription for me to get well. So when I'm new into recovery, of course I have to go to a meeting or a spiritual waiting room. But my primary purpose to be there is to acquire a sponsor, somebody who has a solution to what I suffer from, who can walk me through the step-by-step instructions laid out so eloquently in the big book to get me well. So if you're just going to meetings, you're just sitting in an AA meeting, not seeking that, and you're a real alcoholic, the book says you're going to fail.
Yep.
Right? So we don't want to just get stuck sitting in the spiritual waiting room, because then your son or your daughter or your spouse will come back and say, I tried AA, it doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
And you may believe them, but that is not true. They didn't try AA. They just went to some meetings.
That's right.
And that is not AA, right? Meetings came after the book. Meetings were meant to be a venue where you could, one, acquire a sponsor, and two, talk about struggles you might be having, specifically about step work, so you could get back on the path.
Yep.
I was listening to some Chris Raymer today.
I love it. You're fired up. It's awesome. We love Chris, and we love his brother, by the way, too, Mars. You guys just happen to be listening. We love you. Thanks for showing up. But you're probably not, because Texas, I don't know, they do weird stuff there. So let me tell you something that Dave, just to dovetail. History of AA. People were sponsoring within a few days. They would go through the steps immediately. They would have the experience. They would then share that information. Experience, strength, and hope. This is what it was like. This is what happened. This is what it's like now. And this is what I did, right? It's so interesting because, we're not life coaches. I always tell this to guys I sponsor. Listen, I'm not going to give you unsolicited advice about your life. I don't really care what you decide to do, because the truth is in the long run, the only person that you have to live with is yourself, and specifically God, as he expresses himself in your own personal consciousness. If you can live with it, you can live with it. If you can't, it's a problem. You'll probably drink. And so I used to have a bunch of guys that I would sponsor, and they would call me about, like, you think I should date this chick or this, and I never gave them an answer. I said, this is what I used to say all the time. I'm like, look, dude, you're calling me because you already know the answer. And in fact, my job was to take you through the steps so that you could use your connection to a higher power and your new understanding to figure out. I always would ask this: what step is the solution to that problem or dilemma? And then I would say, you already know the answer, and the only reason you're calling me is in the hopes that I fell out of bed and bumped my head in the morning and had a small trauma, and I'm going to co-sign your bullshit. The only reason you're calling me is on the off chance that I say it's okay when you know it's not. Because if you thought it was okay, you wouldn't have called me in the first place. And that's what doing the steps does, right? Now, I will give you some direct advice on this. I just thought of it when Dave was talking, because he was all fired up about AA. If you go to an open meeting of AA in a clubhouse or somewhere that's a big meeting where they have a lot of literature, there's pamphlets that are free. Books cost money, but pamphlets are free. There is a pamphlet. It is a service pamphlet. It is called Questions and Answers on Sponsorship. We used to have a stack of them over there. They're not there right now. Otherwise, I would show you what it looked like. And that specifically tells what the sponsorship role is, what the duties, how it operates, and how it functions. If you could read that pamphlet and come armed with that information, you will be in a much better place to have that conversation with your son. Now, I want to say one thing else about what Dave said. He's talking about the fellowship, right? The unity part of the triangle. It's simply one side. It's one of the three legacies, right? Now, from my own personal experience, I got sober in LA on fellowship-based recovery, just going to meetings. That lasted about 3 years, and then I drank. And the reason it lasted so long is because I surrounded myself with other sober people and occupied my time with distractions of going to clubs, going to shows, going to meetings, hanging out, going surfing. This is what happened. I attained abstinence just by the association. The same way that sick guys make me sicker, healthy guys will literally make me healthier, not healthier, healthier, not healthy. And what I got from that associations, from those osmotic relationships, is I got relief. But understand this, I got relief from drinking tequila and shooting heroin. I got relief from doing drugs. I got relief from crime and gambling and speeding. I got relief from all those things. What I did not have is freedom from the existential pain or the spiritual pain of my life. Fellowship-based recovery will give me relief, but relief is fleeting and not lasting. Step-based recovery will give me freedom. And once I have freedom from any existential crisis or pain, I never need relief from it again. I may need to get new freedom from the next level of subtle spiritual pain, but not from this one. And that's the difference. I always would say that you take your problems to your sponsor and the solution that he gives you, and then you utilize, that's what you take to the meeting. You take the solution to the meeting, you take your problems to your sponsor. So basically, if you don't have a sponsor, a lot of times you're unloading your problems in meetings too, and that doesn't help anybody. You know, how many times have we seen people that are just like blah, vomiters, like, and they don't do anything? So there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we both got fired up about that one.
Totally.
Yeah, we're about that. All right, let's move on.
Wait, I got one.
Ooh, we got one more. Good.
Question from Joni.
I'm in.
Let me see if I can get her on the line. I told her I would call on her a little moon's age ago. So
Nice.
let's unmute. Joni, you may have to unmute over there. Perfect. Hey.
Just real quick, I was actually talking to my sponsor about this last night, but
She got a sponsor, see that?
it's trying to ride that thin line of not giving unsolicited advice, but being very clear about expectations that I have for my addict. And I guess the compromise here is that for me is we're moving towards this goal of recovery. You know, we're moving towards goals of reuniting my loved one with her children. And all of those things are goals. So in naming expectations, and I gave an example in my questionnaire of if you are suddenly in need of money, and instead of first thinking, hey, I wonder what, you know, maybe a little part-time gig I could pick up or something like that to make some money, instead you decide to sell your children's furniture that you're going to need for them to sleep on. That's probably a wrong decision. And again, you know, it's one of those, okay, do I really need to step in here and say, don't do that, don't be silly, you know,
Right.
Make a smart decision. So, and that's, you know, back to, you know, am I being, I don't know, manipulated by the addict to try and get sympathy so that I come up with money, or are they really looking for a solution?
Interesting.
So those are all great, and checking your expectations is huge. I mean, The truth is that expectations tend to be inversely proportional to my own serenity. That means the higher my expectations, the lower my serenity, because I make assumptions and I accept facts, not in evidence, that I know how someone feels, and I rely on them to be infallible, and they're going to do what's in my head, even though I didn't tell them. So that's the whole point about boundaries. Boundaries are this transmission of information where you no longer have to have expectations because you have set up what you want. Whether they do it or not has no bearing on the fact that you're asserting that boundary, right? And it's interesting because when I have those expectations where I expect them to abide or make the choice not to sell the furniture, you can say, look, if you sell your child's furniture to come up with money, you are not getting any from me. And I'm not really going to help you get your children back. I'm not going to stand up and say you're a good mother if you sold their furniture, right? That's not going to happen. That's my boundary. So what you do is, if you don't have those expectations, excuse me, which are based on what I think someone's thinking or what I think they're doing, I'm not going to have resentments, because expectations are inherently resentments under construction. And it's so funny what you said, what you just mentioned about this idea of the running, so it's either to or away, right? And my sponsor used to say that to me all the time in terms of figuring out my decision-making process. He used to say, are you running away from your last drink, or are you running towards your recovery? And if I use that as kind of a question, the way Dr. Bob used the 4 absolutes, is this something that is taking me away from crisis or taking me towards solution? It's a very simple way to look at it, and that's awesome. And so let's go ahead and jump in, because I think this is perfect segue what she had. So let's talk about asserting these boundaries. So how do I assert the boundaries? Well, I give a directive that is hard. It is fixed, right? So the question is, are these directives inherently adversarial, right? Are they an aggressive adversarial position, an offensive play towards the addict or not? That's really the question.
Hostile.
Hostile, yeah. Are they hostile? Are they hostile, right?
It kind of probably feels like battle or warfare.
It does, and
it almost is.
It is almost. It almost is. Stratego.
Yeah, the game.
The game. The Stratego. What was the other one? Risk. Oh, I loved Risk. I love that game. Yeah, so I always would go for Yakutsk, which is the gateway to the West. It's a good way. Yeah, if you got Australia, you were just
not gonna lose.
You had nothing. Yeah. You had 4 dudes on an island.
I never played Risk.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we should play. Did you play Stratego?
No.
Ooh. These are both solid games. But now we are babbling. All right. Yes to no, 66 to 34. So they are, in fact, not adversarial, even though they feel that way, because they're not overtly offensive, right? So what they are, in essence, is that in telling the person exactly what you want and what you want them to do and what you're willing to let them and not let them do, in a way that is as concise and clear as possible, you have to do in a conversation. It no longer becomes don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. You say, this is what I need. I need this conversation to stop now. I need you to not come to my door at 2 o'clock inebriated. I need these things, and we can discuss it later tomorrow. I need this conversation to end. I need you to calm down, and I need to talk about this tomorrow because I am feeling pressured and uncomfortable and unsafe in this moment, right? So the directive is not really an aggression, it's an assertion. I assert my space, right? I need this to stop. I need this to do. And oddly enough, sometimes people actually respond well to those hard, direct orders. They're like, whoa, I didn't, okay, all right, I can chill for the day. Because a lot of times, if you have this very, very assertive boundary, see, the addict is going to press you, the alcoholic is going to press you in the hopes that they can get a chink in your armor, knock it away, and then get what they want. However, the assertion of this boundary in a strong, firm, absolute way as a directive pretty much cuts that off. And a lot of times they'll be taken aback by that. And even in their brain, again, remember, it doesn't really matter what their motivation is if the result is what is desired. They may, whoa, I should probably go and regroup and figure out a way to circumvent this new wall. And they may back it up and then come back tomorrow. Like, for instance, I need this conversation to stop. We're going to need to discuss this tomorrow. Oh, well, maybe I can go and, like, get my ducks in a row, figure out a new way to manipulate. Regardless of what their motive is in the time, you're actually accomplishing your goal of creating a safety spot for you. And it also demonstrates that you are absolutely, beyond a doubt, clear about what you desire. This is what I desire. It reiterates the fact that you're not mobile on this, that there's no movement, that you're not going to be wishy-washy or flip-flop. It is what it is, all right? So let's move on to the next one. Here's another thing about it, right? So we have to repeat it. When we assert it, we repeat it. So here's a question. And this is what I've always was curious about. If I continually repeat it, remember we said in the technique that we reviewed that you have to stick to your guns over and over again. But the question then becomes, is repeating it so much, does it make the addict immune to it? Is it just like, the broken record, I hear it over and over again? Do you think that it makes them not hear it the more you say it? Because, I remember I would tune things out that I didn't want to hear. So at first glance, do you think that repeating the boundary makes the addict immune to it?
Shall we take a look?
Let's do it. Wow, no, awesome. Three to one, and you guys are on point. Absolutely. It does not, in fact, make the addict immune. In fact, what it does is it keeps you focused on the directive that you are giving. This is the way I want it to be, over and over. Remember, we talked about the idea of denial, right? Because you got to understand that active addicts and alcoholics operate in a constant state of repetitive denial. And denial is actually, you can look at it as an acronym. Don't even notice I am lying, right? That I am oblivious to the truth. And what makes denial so hard is not only am I oblivious to the truth, but the things that are nonsensical that exist in my head, I actually believe are true. Which means that the only way to fight that, if denial operates to make me not only not know I'm lying, but think I'm in possession of the truth, the only way to fight that is through a war of attrition, continuous hammering over and over again. And that's what repeating the boundary does. It helps me stay focused on the directive that I'm giving, and it keeps me from getting diverted by their nonsense, right? Until it is respected, that I'm going to continue to repeat this boundary until you comply. I am not willing to not allow you, not willing to not allow
I think that
you.
was a triple negative.
It was almost a quadruple. I'm not willing to not allow you to not comply with the boundary that I'm not complying with.
Man, my wife, the second grade teacher, would have a field day with you'd be in trouble.
I am already in trouble in my own head at this moment. Call it a broken record or the skipping CD. That, and we said it, is it a broken record? Well, listen, I can't ignore a broken record. It's annoying, and it gets so annoying that I'm just going to finally throw up my hands. It's so funny because one of my favorite techniques, and Davis shared this, that his was the obfuscation technique. I'm going to muddy the waters and convolute the argument so much that you're just going to finally throw up your hands and go, fine, whatever, just do whatever you want.
While hopefully also doubting your own sanity.
Correct,
for
because
thinking I was in the wrong.
Right, that's the bonus. That's the bonus, because that leaves open the next time you come and convolute the circumstance. So, like, I was great at obfuscating, but the thing is that now, as the family member or someone engaged in an addict relationship, I have that same potential. So in essence, the broken record is the thing that is so hammering over and over that they're just going to throw up their hands and say, fine, I'm not going to come by the house. right? This skill is about demonstrating patience, consistency, and continuity. That's what it's all about. And we repeat, 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 because what it does is it demonstrates the serious clarity that you have in this goal and your intentionality. Very, very important, right? That they need to know, right? And it prevents you from being diverted by a clever manipulator or an obfuscator or someone that tries to convolute the circumstance, because it keeps you on focus, on point. All right. So another question, or should we?
No, I
go?
got one I want to say for the Q&A.
Awesome.
I got someone else that was going to share but had to take a phone call, so they're going to let me know when they're back. So
Awesome. So let's move on to the next slide. So now we're getting into really some specifics, right, on how to assert these boundaries. So one thing that, and we've been covering these specifics, but the first one that we're going to look at is specificity. It is very, very important to be specific in a boundary. You don't want it convoluted. You don't want it too long. You don't want it circuitous. You don't want it all over the place, because that can be taken apart, deconstructed, critically disassembled, and used against you, right? So don't try to cover too many issues in one overwhelming boundary. You don't want them to be an umbrella boundary. You want them to be specific. And I know it seems contradictory, because remember we said that they're not responses to individual actions. They are really a response to the entire overarching disease, but specific to the actions you desire, right? So the generality is for the disease, not as a response to a specific action. You stole from me, so I'm going to immediately assert a boundary. No, that this is part of your disease. I'm going to assert these boundaries specifically about stealing and lying and things like that, right? So we don't want to cover too many issues or too many behaviors with one blanket. We want to keep it simple and hyper-focus on single ideas. Each boundary should be about a certain thing. The next thing that they have to be is reasonable. They cannot be out of control, right? Don't shoot for the stars. Don't shoot for the moon. Don't try to get everything at once, right? Start with baby steps, because the overwhelming nature is going to happen not only for you, but for the addict as well. All right. So let's ask another poll question, Dave. So do boundaries require a concrete punishment, or a concrete kind of a retribution or retributive kind of punitive reality? Does it need to be concrete, or can they be like, can there be like one like response to multiple violations, or like multiple boundary violations? Not that they do multiple violations, but like one response to different boundaries, right? Or do they?
Are you talking about like a consequence for a violation? Can it be
Can it
flexible?
be? Yeah, I mean, should there be like one consequence for
Per
like
boundary?
for like 5 different boundaries, and then one for these boundaries, and or is it one per boundary? What do you think? Should it be concrete, or should it be, or could it just be left to your whim at the moment, like whatever's happening? Like if they're trying for one particular thing, a violation of a boundary, you can focus on like a piece that the addict's focusing on in the moment, and maybe put the punishment for that thing, because it may get them where they live, right? That kind of a thing.
Let's take a look.
Yes. So oddly enough, it's kind of not real, right? Oh, yeah, it is. They do actually. I got it backwards. They do require concrete. They need to be actually fixed, like really, really fixed, right? Because, and you don't want them to be too vague, where you don't want one punishment for say 6 or 7 different violations, or types of violations. You want it to be enforceable, which means it has to be steady, right? You say, if you do this, this is what will occur. And if you do this, this is what will occur, right? That they become fixed on punitive responses for specific violations. Let's say you try to do something with money. Okay, well then that means that the response to that is no money, or no paying for your phone, right? So there are repercussions that need to happen for any specific action. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, which means that you can actually have positive repercussions. Like if you do abide by this, then I can help you out with this, or there's something I'm willing to
I have a couple
do.
of people asking questions saying they're confused because they thought boundaries were not about punishments.
They're not about punishment. I don't set a boundary to punish you on the expectation that you're going to violate it. I have the punitive reality of the boundary because that prevents you from hurting me, right? That if so, and it doesn't have to be necessarily like one of these. It's this. Okay, if you violate my boundary of coming to my house or calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning, drunk dialing me, understand that I will not answer the phone for you anymore. And the punitive measure can be, I'm not punishing you particularly. I'm trying to keep my sanity and not have you call me at 2 o'clock in the morning drunk and cursing me out. I'm not going to answer the phone between midnight and 8. That's the boundary. That's the punishment. So that means that if in that time you decide that you want help or want to do something righteous, understand I don't know that, and I'm not going to know that because you have violated my boundary that I want, which means that you no longer have the option to reach out for me at that time.
Yeah, so
understand?
I think it's not so much that boundaries have have punishment, it's that actions have consequences.
Correct.
So I think what Mark is saying is when a boundary is laid out, right, and it's made clear,
It feels less punishing.
well, there's also, if you don't follow this boundary, if you don't take the action necessary, right, you're going to probably experience a consequence.
Correct. A definitive one. That's the key. Right?
Which to an alcoholic or an addict, like to me,
Feels like punishment.
that's a punishment.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is why a lot of our step work is geared towards looking at our past harms and then going to face those harms and
Right.
and in essence accepting the consequences for our past behavior.
Yeah.
Because like Mark has said in the past, we want to be treated like grown-ups and behave like children. And we also really want to like do stupid stuff and bad things to get our way, and we
Have no
really
repercussions.
get resentful when someone says, well, now you're gonna have to pay the consequences.
Right.
So all actions have a consequence, right? And when you're setting the boundary, that, you know, in essence, the consequence becomes apparent based on what your boundary is.
Yeah. So that's exactly it. I mean, the punishment is a punishment that is self-generated, right? Like, I don't go to punish and smack you or spank you. What I do is I set up. So preemptively, you know, look, if you do this, this will happen. That means that the punishment is reactionary, right? You broke the lamp, I spank you. Oh, you're a bad boy. Or a dog gets the freaking newspaper on the butt for peeing on the chair, whatever it is. That's reactionary, right? When I preemptively set this up, it now becomes a cause and effect linkage. And even though the addict will initially feel as though it's a direct punishment that is a reaction to their behavior, what they will come to see is once it happens a couple times in a row that it's not. It's literally the effect of their decision. It becomes a direct cause and effect linkage of their behavior. So really, after a while, you can blame me for punishing you all you want, but the truth is the reason this is occurring is because of the choice you continue to make. You continue to violate this particular idea, right? And that inherently is the logical thing, right? It becomes a logical progression. And that's why we make those logical, because we have to engage in common sense. Like, that's the idea, because who in their right mind would allow themselves to be abused this way? So look, you do this and violate me and steal my sleep and cause me to have an anxiety disorder, where if you continue to do that, I'm not answering the phone. So that means, God forbid, worst case scenario, you're going to have to call somebody else, because if you continue to violate the boundary and recklessly like call me to harass me or try to manipulate me after midnight, understand that I will turn the damn phone off between the time I go to bed at 10 and the time I wake up at 6, which means that if, God forbid, something tragic happens, you're going to have to wait to tell me, right? Or if you want help, you're going to have to wait to tell me. I mean, because it is a direct response. Why would I allow myself to be treated the way you're treating me? So the punishment is not, I mean, it's a punitive result or response, but it's not a reactionary punishment. I'm not spanking you. That's the key. So let's move on to the next slide. And this one, we're again, right? So remember, the boundaries are acts of self-care. They're not attempts to change or control another person's behavior. Now, done correctly, many times the byproduct or the icing on the cake is that those behaviors or patterns are changed, not because you force them to change, but because you limit their potential to stay the same. Do you understand? There's a little difference. I'm not changing your behavior. I'm just limiting your ability to stay the same or to continue the same behavior, right? So let's ask another question. Do you need to explain the reasoning for every single boundary that you have? Do I need to,
Because trust me, we're going to try and make it.
Yes, absolutely. Like I need, like if you give me a boundary, okay, so is that on Tuesday? And
Well, why
exactly
are you doing this?
Why are you doing this?
I don't violate. What do you?
I didn't do that.
Yeah.
It was not me.
Okay, fine. If you want me to respect this, you have to tell me why.
Right.
Ugh,
Exactly.
God, I can
need to
remember
know
those
exactly
things.
why. You need to tell me exactly what I did specifically, so that, which is why, remember at the beginning, we become specific about the behavior we're unwilling to tolerate.
I think we're giving away the answer.
Are we?
I don't know. Maybe this one's just the obvious one.
Maybe it is. I don't know. Let's see what they say. And the answer is no. Either we gave it away or our group is just too smart for their own good.
That's awesome.
And I think that our group is too smart for their own good. Because the truth is you're too smart for your own bad, let's say, which is good being smart. Yes, you do not have to justify or explain every behavior. It is absolutely not about that. Because no matter how much they want, these are for you. They are for your well-being. You do not ever need to explain why you're taking care of yourself. That is not a reason. There is no need to explain, right? Because once you start doing that and you start justifying and rationalizing, you actually inadvertently open yourself up to manipulation and cajoling. Because if you give too much information, Dave and me, in our day, we would use it, right? We were information power brokers. We were shadow brokers. We collected information. We held it in trust. Even though we couldn't remember the shit we did 5 minutes, we could remember what you said because we were going to need that to manipulate you to get what we want.
Well put.
Well put, right? And that's really the thing. So what we also have to do when we assert this boundary is we actually have to be willing to engage in facing our fear, because we're going to have tension, we're going to have frustration, we're going to have fear about this, right?
And the fear can be like real, man. Like if I set this boundary, he may never come back. I may never see him again.
Right.
If I set this boundary, he may relapse and die. Like these are and I've not been a parent, but I can imagine that these are things that a lot of people have going through their head. I mean,
Right.
I talk to parents,
and
who
they are
say
not
they have these
outside of
fears.
the realm of possibility. Like things
Right.
occur, right?
But one of the things a lot of us, whether we're family members of an addict or an addict ourselves, we tend to sometimes inevitably in a moment of doubt say, my situation is different. Nobody has ever felt this way.
Right.
What is wrong with me?
Yeah.
So if you have those fears, they're 100% ordinary and normal, and you're not the only one to feel that way. And that's why things like this exist, for us to talk about that and find that out and implement solutions, right? Because the real danger comes in when I start feeling those fears and I let them consume me,
Right.
and dictate my actions.
That's exactly it, because fear, by its definition, is false evidence appearing real. And even though the possibility of what you fear may occur, it has not yet. So you're allowing something that literally does not exist to dictate what does, which is your behavior in the moment. And that is the conflict. That's why we use false evidence appearing real, because even fears can be practical and pragmatic. But the truth is that until it occurs, it does not occur, which means it doesn't exist, right? They are fantasy. They have not come about, and they do not have to come about. Because just because I think it's a possibility does not mean it's going to be the outcome. Because there's a myriad of possibilities. Because in that type of projection of trying to micromanage something that doesn't exist, I think that I am almost omniscient or omnipotent in this ability. But the truth is I can barely handle things that are simplistic. Look, I tell these guys all the time, the guys I work with, guys I sponsor, guys, the clients here, I say, look, one of the problems with people to get sober is they start to have a little response from their work and they think, oh yeah, this is great, you know, because I did this and now I'm getting the payoff and all that kind of stuff. But the truth of the matter is even on your best day, what you contribute to the outcome of any circumstance is very, very low, because there's just way, way, way too many things that occur in cause and effect on any event that occurs anywhere in the space-time continuum that are too many variables that you have no control over. I tell them, listen, I'll tell you what your effort in recovery pays off 100%. It puts you in a position to be present for the opportunity when the universe reveals it. You do not make the revelation of the opportunity. You do not make the opportunity. You make yourself available for that revelation. Because even at your best day, your absolute best day, the most you can ever contribute to any circumstance is 33%. It falls under what's called the law of syzygy, which is a quantum law, where there needs to be a minimum of 3 factors for anything to exist anywhere in the universe. So it's very physics and quantum-y, just so you know. So let's move on to the next one, which is to be honest. This is a hugely important way to assert your boundary. You have to tell them the truth. You cannot lie, right? And generally, we tend to lie to the people that we're instituting boundaries because we want to save their feelings, right? We want to protect them from being hurt.
Or if we're really pissed, we want to.
Or inflict pain.
Or
Correct.
inflate the damage done.
Correct, correct. We have to be completely practical and pragmatic and honest about it, which means don't delude ourselves, don't work ourselves up into an emotional state where we're prone to hyperbole when we give that out. We don't want to do that. We don't want to overshoot the mark or undershoot. We want it to be frank.
What did they say on Dragnet?
Just the facts, ma'am. Joe Friday.
Yeah, there you go. Just the facts.
Just the facts. I tell that when I'm talking about my 9-step letters for my guys. It's got to be just the facts, right? I would rather someone be mad because I hurt their feelings than dead. It's just that simple. I don't want to spare their feelings or anything like that. Look, you see it all the time. We see it in treatment all the time with what's called negative contracts. That's when somebody's doing something untoward and the people that live with them or live around them know, and they keep it to themselves under some vague, nebulous, wannabe gangster, incarcerated, snitches get stitches nonsense, right? They're like, oh, I can't tell him, a boy, you know, I got his back, yada, yada. The truth is you want to have his back, you may need to be willing to be a pallbearer at his funeral, because holding that secret may kill him. And I would much rather somebody never speak to me again than not be able to. And that's the truth. You want to be mad at me for putting you on blast? It's like when Sharon first shared, she called the DA, she said, and the attorney and everybody, begging them to put her son in long-term treatment. Like, that's like, you ratted me out to the DA. What are you thinking, right? You tried to do this to me. No, I tried to do it for you. I would much rather have you safe and alive and angry than not. It's just that simple, right? It's kind of that simple. And remember, I'm going to reiterate this one more time. Understand that no is a complete sentence. Absolutely. It does not require an explanation. It does not require rationalization. It is a fact. You are entitled to want what you want and not what you don't want, right? And if you feel guilty when you first set boundaries, I don't care. Do it anyway. Because you will feel guilty. Because even though allowing yourself to be manipulated has pushed that person deeper into their addiction and closer to death, it still feels that you are breaking what is considered the delineated role of a parent. You know, saying no, having these boundaries will make you feel like you're bad and you don't live up to the standard of love that our society has created. I don't do it anyway. Feel bad, but do it, because it does not matter, right? Do it anyway, because you will, right? Emotional weakness or its appearance is an invitation for you to get manipulated and be attacked by a creative manipulator, right? All right, so this is where we were going to get into the righty stuff.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah,
We'll
because
start
we'll start next week.
So I got a couple questions. It's 9:05, so we're gonna
71
ask Mark to be thorough
and brief.
and short-winded.
That's gonna happen around about quarter to never. I'm gonna try though.
What we believe, we become.
I know, I'm in my
Do or do not.
in my head, I'm mantrically trying to pray for it already.
So first, I have someone who I don't think has spoken here live before, which is always exciting.
Nice.
So I'm gonna get Liz on, and she just has a question for us. So Liz, I'm gonna unmute you. I believe you have to go ahead and do the same.
Hello,
Hi,
Hello.
Liz.
how are you?
Doing
You're
well.
good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. First, I want to say thank you for your webinars. I have an addict that I've been struggling with boundaries for 3.5 years. And every time I listened to you, you made me stronger and also worked the steps on my program. And I'm thankful and grateful to say that my son is in recovery. He just left a 90-day program.
Nice.
And this is his third attempt. But because I learned the boundaries from and the reinforcement from you, I was strong enough. And I will tell you, it's the hardest thing ever to do in your life as a mother.
Mhm.
But the best thing I ever did. I feel like I'm saving my son's life by pushing him away, honestly.
Mm.
But I want to thank you, and everything you said is true. And it's so hard to do. It's
Right.
so worth it. So
Right.
now I'm in a different position that I've never been in before, that he's very healthy. He's working the steps, really working the steps. On step 4, first time ever. This is only his second day out. He's already, working the program, and we'll try to find a sponsor. He knows how important that is. But what can I do to help support my son while he's still living in my home, knowing that he is responsible for his own recovery? And he knows my boundaries. He knows our boundaries. What can I do? I can't baby him. I can't breathe down his neck. What do you think I should do?
Okay. Well, you need to, the boundaries that you were able to institute, utilize that help facilitate your son getting into treatment and being sober, and now need to evolve and mature. So you need to kind of readdress those boundaries. I would approach them with your sponsor and talk about the development of them now that he is sober, now that he's come out of treatment and is moving back into your house. So one of the things that we know in AA as well as in Al-Anon in terms of the traditions is that we become self-supporting through our own contributions. So having the boundary of having your son actually pay rent. Now, it doesn't have to be outlandish or unacceptable. A lot of times in early sobriety, we can't really afford that much, and we may have to now start stacking a few shekels to start to make our amends because we owe financial amends and things like that. But you can come to a practical, realistic thing where he needs to maybe have some, he needs to wash dishes or have a couple chores and then pay some rent or maybe mow the grass. He needs to be at so many meetings, right? And you need to be able to say, listen, I need to want to test you. And there's a couple things that I would say about testing is that do not buy drug tests at the CVS. They're crazy expensive. You go on Amazon, you can get them at wholesale prices for very, very reasonable 8-panel, 10-panel tests. Don't get sucked into that. And there's nothing wrong with that, having somebody test, right? And talk to them openly about their program and where they're at. It's amazing that he's on his 4-step. That's fantastic,
Yeah, and like Mark was saying about drug testing, also remember, right, if you're truly sober, being asked to take a drug test is no big deal.
Doesn't matter.
So if there's a lot of animosity and hostility, that's something we're going to get into in a few weeks in the series, which is like warning signs. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are high, although it could. It could mean they're starting to feel restless, irritable, discontent again, maybe disconnected, maybe slipping back into their old ways. So it's just a warning sign. But, I think also, it's one thing if they've just gone to treatment or like in sober living, right, then boundaries evolve one way.
Mhm.
But if he's coming back to live with you, you still can implement with minor variations a lot of the boundaries that you had set because it's your home.
Mhm.
You know, one of the things that we find effective here, I don't know if he has a job yet, but we have our clients not allowed in their house from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. until they find a job.
Perfect.
Right? And we have them bring back copies of applications that they filled out, you know, or some guys that are really bad at it, we have them take a selfie at the place where they're applying just to prove they went.
Yep.
So I don't know if you want to take it to that extreme, but we had, you know, maybe like some sort of schedule or some sort of structure, you know what I mean? Just to get that sense of sort of adult life and responsibility in play.
Right, and also again, as these evolve, you make sure that you reiterate the idea that these particular boundaries are necessary because they are a result of your previous behavior. I'm doing this to ensure my safety and my ability to maintain my own program and still help you. And this is to get into some subtle stuff is it's actually hard if for us that get sober and generally desire to be a better man. I'm working on my 4-step, getting into all my steps, and really starting to look at my own failings and shortcomings and wanting to be better. What I know is that it's difficult for me initially when I'm really engaged in trying to do the right thing. Sometimes it's okay. It's okay for family members to assist, to help. You just have to be clear about the boundary between helping and enabling, and for yourself. And as the addict, sometimes it's hard to receive because I've spent so many years as a liar and a taker that initially, even when I'm doing the right thing, I still have residual guilt because it's almost as though the behavior itself of receiving something is inherently an emotional trigger. So I feel like I'm still taking, even though I'm receiving, based on what I've done to allow that reception, right? You understand? There's a line in the very last page of the big book in A Vision for You. It's the very last page of the text. It says, obviously we cannot transmit something we haven't got. My experience is that what I haven't got initially is not the knowledge of the steps or the ability to work them. What I haven't got is the ability to receive with grace, because I spent my life being such a taker that I'm still a little jaded. I think that nothing can be given to me freely. So I always have this kind of like idea that there's a string attached. So until I get rid of that and learn to receive with an honest sense of grace and gratitude, with a simple thank you and true gratitude, I cannot give without a string. So it's a dance, right? It's a dance, and open discussion is the best way. And if he's really legitimately sober and looking to increase his ability, he will have no problem having open communication with you. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Last question.
Last question.
That one only took 6 minutes.
Yeah, well, I was hoping it took like 2, but that's okay.
I'll try to keep it to 2 this time.
I don't think you're going to be able to, but
I'm
I'm going to need you to. So I'm going to have Dana F. come on and ask the final question.
I'm going to time it.
Okay. I feel like this is a setup because
It
this
is.
is like your favorite thing to talk endlessly about.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it about God?
Hey, Dana.
Hi,
Hi.
Dave.
First of all, thank you for the webinar.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
One thing I wanted to say is I mentioned was that my son, when I wanted him to do a selfie, he would say he couldn't because something was wrong with his phone. All of a sudden, his phone was misfunctioning or whatever. I didn't believe him.
Of course.
Right.
Of course. He just posted on Instagram 3 beers and a joint he was doing with his buddy, though. Yeah.
Right. But my question is, can you have spiritual pain without addiction?
Oh my God! You want me to keep this one to 2 minutes?
I told you.
Oh my God! Are you
Great,
kidding me?
good question.
Oh my God! Of course you can have spiritual pain. Everyone on the planet has spiritual pain. All right, I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible.
Isn't that? I knew.
Fuck, this is so hard. Oh, I'm sorry. I used the F word. This is so frustrating. Okay, so, oh my God. All right, so my mom, God bless her. I love her. She's cranky. But when she had a bad day, she would come home and she had spiritual pain because she was a teacher. She taught English as a second language. She would get frustrated. She would get angry. She would be hurt by something someone said, she would come home and she would break out a pint of Ben and Jerry's and watch all my children. And that's how she escaped from her existential spiritual pain. I had spiritual pain, thinking I was not liked or I was not good enough or whatever the nonsense was. And my response to that was not to eat Ben and Jerry's and watch a soap opera. My response was to get really, really drunk and high and generally speed on my motorcycle or in a car or do crimes or crazy behavior. So yes, the entire world has spiritual pain. The difference is that as addicts and alcoholics, our coping skills that are escapist and defective and denial based are far more deadly than the world's, which, although at first glance appears to be a problem, in the long run turns out to be the blessing. Because without the critical nature of my negative coping, I would never be forced to come and learn the proper spiritual coping mechanisms.
Oh my God, we have
3 minutes.
That was amazing. I hope that answered your question. I think he's good when he's short and sweet and to the point when he sets a timer. That was spot on.
I
man.
didn't set the timer.
That was great. So I think that's a good one to end on. Some
It is.
spiritual.
If you want to call me, put my phone number. You wanna-
8887.
8887. If you want to call me, Dana, on Monday, because I'm not here on Friday, if you want to call me Monday in the afternoon and talk at length about this, because this is a huge topic, huge. Like, listen, I think everyone on the planet has existential pain and anxiety. I think that addicts, unfortunately, just need more intensity to reconcile it, both using and sober.
So I put Rabbi Mark's phone number in the chat box as well as his email. If we did not get to your questions tonight, Mark will follow up next week with an email or a phone call and get to all of your unanswered questions. Just for time's sake, we don't have the opportunity to get to every single one, but we don't ignore you guys. We see your questions. We literally print out a report and Mark goes through them one at a time with like a highlighter and a pen, like old school, and just gets to everybody. So fear not on that front. Remember to donate to the webinar link if need be on the Schnellberger Family Foundation.
Please.
Every little bit helps. Join our Facebook group, which is the Schnellberger Family Foundation Empowerment Group.
Yeah. Awesome.
We have some fun and exciting stuff planned with the foundation in the upcoming months. So make sure you stay tuned for updates on all of that.
Are we having another weekend?
We may be. We don't want to count our
Chickens before they hatch. There you go.
So we are excited about a lot of the stuff we have in store with the foundation, made possible from viewers like you and the donations that you make. That was a PBS.
PBS.
Wow.
Made possible by
That
donations
just
from
happened,
viewers
but I
like
guess that's why they decided.
and
on
the
that.
Rand Foundation. I wish the Rand Foundation sponsored.
So I think we leave it to that. Thank you to Beverly and Coach for the Schnellberger Family
Coach.
Foundation,
Hi,
as
Bev.
well as Tim, who is our CEO, who makes all this possible behind the scenes. And to all of you out there, without you, there would be no us to talk to anybody out there. So that didn't make sense, but
Totally did.
you are important to us, and hearing your stories is what gives us that fuel to get up and come to work every day and work with your loved ones so that we can get you guys back the family member that you lost to this almost curse, this awful disease. Because we love your loved ones much like you do, and we just hate this disease that they're suffering from, and we're sick of talking about how much it sucks. We want to just get them well so we can get back to living and enjoying life.
And welcome back to our friend from Washington and Alaska. We hope that you are healing quickly, and we send out prayers for you. And we will see you all next week.
Have a good weekend, guys. Be safe. We'll see you next Thursday.
Bye-bye.